Ideally, when the adult child approaches the parent, they want a better relationship with them. They want to have the parent. They want to feel heard by the parent. They want to feel cared about by them. They want to feel understood by them. And even
Mhm.
if they know that the parent doesn't particularly agree with their rendition of their childhoods or their past, they want to feel like the parent cares enough to just understand and show empathy. People can have really different perspectives, but if you can promote empathy and understanding, that's far more important than proving who's right and who's wrong.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terry Cole Show. I just had the most fascinating conversation with a new friend, Dr. Coleman. I just met him a couple of weeks ago, and I loved him so much. He is a family estrangement expert. He also does the Dear Doctor column for Maria Shriver's Sunday paper. He's written for the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal. But I listened to his book, Rules of Estrangement, on the way to doing this gig that we were doing mutually. And I really loved it so much. So The Rules of Estrangement, it's out by Random House, is so really good. And he's got a bunch of other books as well. But if you have any interest in family harmony, I think you would love this episode with Dr. Joshua Coleman. I'm so pumped to welcome my new friend, Dr. Joshua Coleman, to the Terry Cole Show.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you again.
You too. Okay, so you guys, I was telling you this at the top of the show. So Josh and I were both doing a show on family estrangement, and they told me who the other expert was going to be on the show. And I looked up and saw Dr. Coleman, and I literally downloaded the book immediately and listened to the entire thing while I was traveling there. And I was so happy that I wasn't going to be on the show by myself and that I was going to be on the show with you. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Here we are.
Well, thank you. It was such a pleasure to meet you, and it was actually a really fun part of the whole engagement. So I was really happy that we got to meet each other and collaborate in that way.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about it. What the show was we were talking about was family estrangement, and that's a lot of what you talk about. And I did all this research on you. It's so funny, Josh. Like you probably don't Google yourself much, but when I was doing research on
No
you,
more than once a day.
every no more than once a day.
I limit it there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Good self-restraint you've got going there.
Perfect.
But every article, I swear, like you really are the king of this niche market. And it's so interesting that there is so much of this happening out here right now, family estrangement. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to this topic specifically, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, I mean, sadly, what brought me to the topic was a several-year-long estrangement from my own kid. I was married and divorced in my 20s, and I have a daughter in her 40s now, I'm very close to. But there was a period of time in her early 20s where she cut off contact for several years, in large part as a result of my remarrying and having children. My new marriage, which I'm still married. I'm not married to my children, but I'm married to the wife for the children.
Right.
I'm feeling in many ways displaced, in some ways that they had got the value of a secure household and that she was raised in a context of a divorce and feeling like, in some ways just displaced and hurt. And initially when she tried to talk to me about it, I think I was defensive and probably angry and didn't really empathize. And I think she was kind of like, well, screw that. I'm simplifying it, obviously, but as a result, weren't in contact for several years, and it was a terrible time for me. It's what the worst, most painful thing I've ever been through or hope to go through again. And eventually I was able to sort of change my approach and just be empathic and shut up and listen and more importantly, take responsibility and find the truth in what she was saying. And so as a result of that, after we reconciled, and there was nothing at the time to guide me about it. And I was in therapy with a good, otherwise great therapist that gave me terrible advice, as therapists often do in this space who aren't familiar with this issue. So as a result, I wrote my first book on the topic, When Parents Hurt. As a result of that, got a wide following of estranged parents here and in other countries, developed a whole webinar series, which I've been doing, for the past 13 years, and then wrote my newest book, Rules of Estrangement, which you can see subtly behind me, 2021. Result of that, got even more followers. So I've just really been steeped in this topic. And at this point, my whole practice is purely based around estrangement. So that's kind of the personal side of this.
So what are the most common pathways that get people to family systems to be in an estrangement?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one pathway, I think parents often don't want to talk about it because they assume that people assume that they must have done something really terrible and egregious to cause their child to cut off contact. And in fact, that is the cause for some. If you molested your
Hmm.
child, beaten them, or kept them on a locked closet all their life, or deprived
Yeah.
them of any kind of a good life, it's understandable that that adult child may not want to have a relationship with you. But that
Right.
isn't the only pathway. Divorce is probably the most common pathway that I see for a variety of reasons. With a divorce, whether it's a gray divorce, somebody divorces in their late 50s to 60s, or the kids are already grown, or it's a divorce that happens when the children are young. There's a variety of ways that can increase the risk of estrangement. It can cause one parent to poison the child against the other parent. We call parental alienation. It can cause the child independently to side with one parent over the other, even if the parents manage the divorce well. It can bring in new people into the child's life, step siblings, half siblings, stepmothers, boyfriends, girlfriends that the child has to compete with. So divorce is huge. Therapy is actually huge. I'm doing some writing and have done some writing about the problems with therapy and therapists, because therapists these days assume that somebody comes into therapy with depression or anxiety or anything like that, that there must be a trauma that underlies it. And so many therapists are labeling, calling parents narcissists and borderlines and gaslighters and all the other languages of today, and supporting, if not encouraging, estrangements. So that's a problem. When the child remarries, that can not remarries, but marries at all, the new husband or wife may say, choose them or me. You can't have both. A mental illness in the parent, certainly, but a mental illness in the child can also be a cause. And ironically, maybe not so ironically, the past 4 decades, we've been really becoming much more intensive at our parenting. We have fewer children. So some ways, children just got too much of the parent. They don't know any other way to feel separate from the parent than to cut off contact with them. So that's another pathway. So I see those as being the most common pathways.
That's actually a really good point, though, of how how parenting has changed over the past 75 years, let's say, or 50 years for sure.
Yeah.
And if we both probably were to look at our own childhoods, okay, nobody knew where we were. Like,
Right.
nobody was hovering.
And it
Like,
was
they
the
were
beauty,
like,
right?
right?
The
Like,
beauty of our childhoods is that had so much freedom. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
no, 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 we did.
Yeah.
And, it's funny, you see these reels online where people who were born in raised in the 70s and 80s, right? That, talking about being the feral generation, so to speak. And I think there's something to the freedom, and obviously there's got to be something in between there. But
Yeah.
I do think that it's the same way that I look at what happens for famous people,
Mhm.
right? All of this scrutiny that happens, all of this being under a microscope,
Yeah.
it creates problems. It's hard to develop the self when you're developing so much self-consciousness
That's really
next to
a great
it.
putting it. You should write something with that title, because I think it's a really poignant way to put it. And it's true. It's like you have a flashlight in your eyes all the time, focusing on you and your feelings. And do you have any obstacles? Or, there was a study done by Marian Cooper, a Stanford sociologist, and she summarized it in the book called Cut Adrift. And she talked about how, particularly children of the upper class, the parents are so worried about them losing status that they're constantly preoccupied with, well, are they anxious? Are they depressed? Do they have ADD? Do they have learning disabilities? Let's get them into therapy. Let's get them a tutor. Let's get them a specialist. And so these kids are so hovered over. That's why I say, at least one pathway is that these kids feel like, enough, give me some breathing room. But for some of them, an estrangement is the only way to do it. But you're right that we have become much too preoccupied with our children's happiness, their well-being, and their feelings. And in our generation, our parents, like I once heard John Stewart say, I was raised in the generation of, you're not so special. It's kind of like, our generation of parents. I mean, I was blessed with loving parents. In some ways, I think they probably did give me some feeling that I could do things, and they thought I should be a doctor. And, it's just, I'm
Hmm.
Jewish, so that's sort of your kind of pathway to whatever. I was a medical doctor, which is what they would have really preferred. But I was a doctor nonetheless. But I was mostly left alone. As you said, on the weekends, as kids, we'd get up, we'd be out for the day. Maybe we'd come back for lunch. Then we'd be back out again, come back for dinner, then be back out again until nighttime.
Yep.
And parents weren't worried. They weren't in our faces. They weren't thinking about us, and we weren't thinking about them. Whereas parents have become so intensive, so worried, so anxious, so guilt-ridden, and so intrusive, and so surveilling with cell phones now, to your point, it actually increases anxiety. It increases
Yeah.
mental illness because there's just too much focus on it. And they're not allowed to feel separate.
There's no privacy.
Right.
There's no emotional or psychological privacy. And what I see in my therapy practice is like this tendency when the parent also feels like they're the one who can fix everything.
Right.
If the kid is having a problem, they're going to talk to the headmaster. They're
Right.
going to get someone fired. They're going to having no belief in the kid's ability to manage. And I'm not saying abandon the kid, obviously, but
Right.
I am saying isn't our job as parents to prepare kids to be in the world? But there is something very self-focused on the parent point of view where I'm going to insert myself as
Mhm.
the only solution to your problem is what I think. Rather than teaching kids these critical thinking skills,
Mhm.
asking them, hey, what does your gut say? What do you think you should do? I trust your gut instinct. You know about this situation.
Mhm.
Certainly we should explore what you think. It doesn't mean we leave the kid alone and go, you're on your own, figure it out.
Right.
It's guiding them to their own intuitive brains and their own wisdom and their own ability to problem solve.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. That and being authoritative. I think too many parents are so worried about hurting their children, and they're so at risk of being accused of emotionally abusing their children that they're not kind of just, there's a place for because I said so, or no, we're not going to talk about how you feel about it. You just have to do it. You have to do your homework,
Yep.
or you have to come in at the right time, or whatever. And I think parents, in many ways, have ceded the authority not only to their children but also to professionals such as therapists. There are so many kids who are being in therapy to know it just makes them worse. It just makes them even more preoccupied with their feelings, or makes them have a much stronger case against the parent. Well, my therapist says this or that,
Yep.
and then it kind of undermines the parental authority, which is a really big problem.
Yeah. So in your expertise and in your experience, is familial estrangement on the rise?
Oh, it's clearly on the rise. I mean, I think it's clearly on the rise. We don't have good beginning statistics because it's only been tracked, maybe about the past 15 years or so. So we don't have kind of a pre and post thing to track.
Mm.
Can other things like, depression or other things. But the reasons I think it's on the rise, if you just look at divorce rates, so in my survey of 1,600 parents that I did through the University of Wisconsin Survey Center, 70% of those were divorced. So if you just look at the beginning point, we start tracking divorce around 1970 to got a 40% divorce rate for parents. I mean, if we know that they're more at risk, that alone is a beginning factor. Then you have rising rates of individualism in the United States. Individualism is defined as a preoccupation with one's self, one's identity, one's happiness, one's growth. I mean, all those things emphasize one's own aspirations away from other people's feelings. That's huge. The rise of the internet, TikTok influencers, Instagram influencers, these people have an opinion about what's a toxic parent, what's a narcissistic parent, what you should do. That's huge. Rising rates of mental illness, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you just look at those factors alone, to me, it's obvious. Plus, also political differences, increasing rates of tribalism. There was an Ipsos poll done in 2016 that said that something like 16% of families became estranged just over politics. That's certainly
Yep.
it used to be that maybe you weren't crazy about the fact that your kid was going to marry a Republican if you're a Democrat, or they were going to marry a Democrat if you're a Republican. You're like, oh, as long as they love each other, that's fine. Not so anymore. Now people hate the other side, and that's a cause of estrangement as well.
Yeah. I actually saw a lot of that in my practice
Yeah,
from the 2016 election and what was going on, where families who had really weathered many storms,
yeah,
and a lot of people ended up putting in place, and I did in my own family, of
mhm,
any extended, because my close family all were of similar mind, but
yeah,
extended family, no. And
hmm
I just said to people, like, there's no way in hell you could possibly engage me in a conversation about
right,
politics or vaxxing or anti or whatever, because we're related and I want to still see you at Christmas. I want to talk to you.
right.
So no, because I know I'm not changing my Uncle Mike's mind about shit, and he's not changing mine.
Changes either, right? I've got a younger brother who's that way. He's a major conspiracy theorist, and it's like I used to argue with him, and now it's just kind of like, let's not go there. We both laugh about it, and we talk about things that we can relate to, and it's like,
Yes.
it's much healthier.
It is, because here's the thing, we're allowed to be different.
Right. Exactly. It's part of being different kind of makes relationships more interesting in a way. If we're all exactly alike, what's so fun about that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in your experience with families, because this is the main thing that you're working with,
Yeah.
is parents who have estranged kids. So what do the parents say? Like what are you hearing from the parents?
Well, parents are, first of all, incredibly heartbroken. I did a retreat recently with 14 estranged parents, and one of the mothers was talking about feeling suicidal. And I said, so if I could just stop you for 1 second, I want people to raise their hands if they've ever thought about suicide as a result of their estrangement. It was mostly moms. There was one other dad in the group, and every one of them raised their hands. So the amount of suffering that a parent experiences when they're going through an estrangement is huge. So they say they feel depressed, suicidal, anxious, scared they'll never see their children again or their grandchildren again. And they're also confused by what they're being accused of. Parents have been parenting for the past 4 decades or so, are probably some of the most educated, dedicated, psychologically sophisticated parents of any generation before them. I'm not saying all of them are great. There's still plenty in there who abuse their children and, were problematic and that kind of thing. But
Sure.
but not all of them were, and certainly not all of the ones who are becoming estranged. And one of the ways to think about it is that for so many of these parents who are accused of emotionally neglecting, emotionally abusing their children, harming them, traumatizing them, there's a study by Australian psychologist Nick Haslam, and he showed that over the past 3 decades, there's been what he calls a concept creep in what we label as harmful, abusive, neglectful, traumatizing behavior. So the generations are talking about this from totally different angles. From the parents' perspective, it's like, what, you call that a harm? You call that abuse, trauma? I would have killed to have a childhood like yours. And the adult child is saying, well, this is what my therapist says was harmful or abusive or traumatizing. So, a lot of my work deals with helping the parent learn how to speak the language of the adult child. Because as we were talking about with our family members, you're never going to persuade the other. And because the parent is in so much pain and the adult child is estranged, feels like it's working for them, it is incumbent on the parent, if they want a reconciliation, they have to take the lead. They have to empathize. They have to show courage. They have to not get defensive, not blame, not shame, all those things, which aren't always so easy to do as a parent.
Oh, I think it's extremely hard to do.
It is.
And I think that it is extremely hard to not compare, to not want to minimize what they experienced. And
Right.
yet, what I loved about so much of what you were saying on that panel that we were on, coaching the parents to sort of keep their eye on the prize
Right.
of what it is that they want. If reconciliation is what you want, then allowing the fact that, like, you have these great ideas, which I wanted to talk about, letters
Mm-hmm.
that can be written.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that struck me was in the letters that an estranged parent says to the estranged kid is, you must have you must have believed this was the best thing to do for you,
Yeah, the
or
estranged.
I don't think, or you wouldn't have done it. Basically,
Right.
like, acknowledging, and also acknowledging their right to do it, because I think part of what you see, and what I've seen in my practice too, is that some parents feel this sense of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who the fuck are you
Exactly.
to what?
Right.
You can't not talk to me,
Right. Exactly. After all I've done for you in particular, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. You want to know what a
Indeed.
bad childhood looks like? I'll tell you what a bad childhood looks like. That's what I had. Yeah. I'm not saying me.
Exactly. And yes, and that proves their point
Right.
that it's impossible to talk to you. It
Yep.
proves their point that you will never understand
Yep.
or validate
Yep.
what they experienced. Just
Right.
because their parents beat them and you didn't beat your kids doesn't mean that you didn't fail them in some way, because we all do. We
Exactly.
all have. If you
Yep.
have kids,
Yep.
trust me,
Yeah.
it's already done. You've already failed them,
You've already
right?
failed them. Sorry. Too late. Deal with it.
just, and you can just be sorry.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You can simply be sorry without an excuse, without telling them why you did what you did. Be sorry. I am sorry for the ways that I failed my kids, and I have told them that. Like,
Sure.
it's just it. Like, no, there's no. I didn't say this part, but the truth is, there's no fucking guide. Like, nobody tells you how to do it. I married kids. I was like, oh my god, never did the terrible twos. Just went straight into the terrifying teens, and you're like, I'm sure I'm doing it all wrong, but I'm doing it, and I'm committed
Yep.
to doing it. What do you find that the adult children say Like, and what is your part in facilitating this?
I mean, I think what parents have to understand is that the adult child is being raised in a very therapeutic language culture where therapeutic narratives are really the way that they're defining themselves and thinking about themselves. And that they want a relationship with a parent that occurs in the context of growth and self-esteem and protecting their mental health. Like one of the things I see in practically every letter from an estranged adult child is, I have to do this to protect my mental health or the mental health of my children. Or I don't want to pass on the traumas that you gave to me to my children, or you have to work on your trauma. So it's a very trauma informed kind of a way of thinking about things. But I think ideally when the adult child approaches the parent, they want a better relationship with them. They want to have the parent. They want to feel heard by the parent. They want to feel cared about by them. They want to feel understood by them. And even if they know that the parent doesn't particularly agree with their rendition of their childhoods or their past, they want to feel like the parent cares enough to just understand and show empathy. It's kind of like what we do in marriage therapy. People can have really different perspectives, but if you can promote empathy and understanding, that's far more important than proving who's right and who's wrong. So, I mean, it's hard for parents if they're being told that they neglected, harmed, abused, or traumatized their children. No parent is not going to feel the sting, if not the slap of that. But to your point, you have to think about it from the perspective it's not really about you at that point, which is it's no easy task. But what I tell parents is you have to distinguish between self-dialogue and the dialogue you have with your child. Your self-dialogue is, you were a difficult kid, or the divorce made it harder, or your other parent poisoned you against me, or you had learning disability potential, all the things, or I was an amazing parent, or you're not remembering all of just the fact that a year ago you said I was best parent ever, and now you're saying that I emotionally abused you now that you're in therapy. That's part of your self-talk. You have to self-soothe. You can't expect your child to empathize with you or soothe you. What you say to the child is, yeah, I'm sorry. It's clear that I have significant blind spots that I wasn't aware that was so hurtful to you. I'm glad you told me. Can you tell me if it happens, can we go into family therapy to work more on it? So I think all those things are important. So when I'm doing family therapy, what I tell parents with the adult child, if they've been estranged, what I tell the parent is, this isn't marriage therapy. You don't have an equal say of how this is going to come out. You don't get to go in there. If you're married, you kind of get an equal say. It's going to get negotiated and compromised. You're going to meet in the middle. Not so here. Your goal is to keep your kid coming back for another session so that they're feeling like estrangement isn't their best interest. So to that extent, I'm going to be holding your feet to the fire. And if I think if you're doing anything or saying anything that's making your kid feel defensive or unheard or hurt, I'm going to stop you right there. And I am confrontive in my sort of more, friendly way. I'm not like getting somebody's face, but I am confrontive in that sense. And I tell the adult child the same thing if I'm trying to persuade them to do family therapy with me and the parent. I will say, look, the whole goal of the family therapy is to get your parent to do a deeper dive into why you feel like this has been the best thing for you and the changes that they would need to make in order to be more respectful of your boundaries and to take responsibility for the ways that they've hurt you in the past that they haven't been able to do. And I'm there as your advocate. And I've told your parent the same thing. So we're all on the same page. It's not because any surprise. I'm not going to, just waylay the parent and surprise them. And if I think it was really hard on the parent, I'll call them up afterwards and say, let's debrief. It's typically not as hard on the adult child because they do have their back. So for them, it's kind of, it's very rare that the adult child doesn't feel supported by me, but the parent might because I am putting much more pressure on them. And not all parents are willing to do what I tell them that they have to do if they want to have a reconciliation. I'm like, this isn't a moral principle. This doesn't make you a better person. It's just the only pathway to having a relationship with your child. It's binary. There's not 5 options here.
Right. You're like, trust me. This is what I do. If there were more options, I'd be sharing them with you, buddy.
Yeah, I'm not holding out on
you. Seriously. So question, why do you think, you call it a silent epidemic? Why do you think that is?
I mean, it's becoming less silent, but I think that a lot of parents still won't talk about it because they're worried that people are going to say, well, you must have done something pretty terrible. I mean, people don't just cut off the parent for no reason. I mean, I'm a psychologist. When my kid did it to me, it's like, oh, great. Here you're a psychologist. You can't
totally
keep your kid in your life. And I mean, I had a good experience after I'd written my book. I was at a conference and there were a couple of older psychologists there whose work I really admire and respect. And I gave them a copy of the book and they said, oh, how did you get into this? And I was kind of like, oh, well, and I was really embarrassed to talk about it. But I did talk about it. They said, oh, we're actually experiencing the same thing with one of our kids now. And they actually consulted with me later about it. So you just don't know who's estranged and who isn't. But that's the reason why it's still silent. People are just worried they're going to be blamed and shamed, and some really are. So it's not a crazy idea.
Yeah, I also think that what you said before is so true, where the parents feel like they're going to be judged. Like, what have you done to create this estrangement?
Right.
And I think that the interventions that you talk about, and I loved your book so much. What I loved so much about the book is that there were stories and family stories, and you could really see the principles and in action. And Josh, you also shared stories where it worked out great and stories where it didn't work out
Yeah,
great.
because it doesn't always.
Right. But it was so helpful to see that if people can learn how to communicate more effectively,
Hmm.
that there is hope. And you're really talking about, and of course, I look at everything sort of through the lens of boundaries,
Sure. Yeah.
and what you're really talking about, so much of it in Rules of Estrangement, is how do we create healthy boundaries. I just had
Right.
someone in, of course, that I was talking to, and she was saying, there's a cultural thing. She lives overseas and feels disrespected by her nephews and nieces, and she wants to have a closer relationship with them, and it wasn't something that the family did. And she said something, and they don't really care. And she's like, so I really need help with scripts. And I was like, I think that what you need help with, or what we should start with, is really looking at the relationship you do or don't have
Mhm.
with them.
Yeah.
And if you want to build a more intimate relationship with them, asking if they're interested in doing that,
Yeah.
seeing how that could be facilitated, because it's certainly not I didn't feel it was a script issue.
Right.
It's
No.
a connection issue, the cultural element. And listen, this is probably in the US too, but I felt it very strongly because the language was a lot of feeling disrespected.
Mhm.
They should want a relationship with me because I'm their aunt.
Yeah.
And they should want to,
Right.
even if the adults in the scenario when they were little kids didn't facilitate it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, you can't create a bond out of thin air simply because you think they should
Right.
want
Exactly.
it.
Right.
Right.
No, I think that's really true. And I think a lot of parents make that mistake too. Kind of this is what I'm owed after everything I've done for you, after all the ways that I've helped you. This is the least you can do for me. And it's just not a way to negotiate a relationship. I think the other part of your point is that some people just aren't capable of getting what they want from their parent, and they have to kind of grieve that and accept that. I mean, they should try. They should make it as easy as possible on the parent to provide that. If you're going to try to have a better relationship with your parent, if you come in saying, "My therapist thinks you're a narcissist or borderline personality disorder or boundary
Mm.
crosser or gaslighter," you're just going to get defensiveness. If you really want them to change, you have to start by talking about what you love, admire, or appreciate about them as people or as parents, and tell them that the reason that you're raising this is because you want to be even closer. That's going to be a bid for a better relationship. But the reality is, I work with parents sometimes, and I have to tell the adult child, typically separately, they just can't be there for you in the way that you want them to be. You have to kind of mourn that they just don't have that capacity.
Yeah.
they've had too much trauma themselves, or they're just, for whatever reason, they're just not that person, and you're wanting them to be somebody that they're not, and you're kind of mad at them for doing something they just don't have. It's not really their fault. So you're far better off
Right.
focusing on what you can get from them and building a relationship from that than trying to hold them to some standard that they just can't abide by.
Yeah, I do think that it's such an important point that we have to mourn the relationship we wished
Yeah.
they were capable of, or that we were capable of together, if we are to embrace the beauty of what's possible to create now.
Right.
Like,
Said.
we can have it now, right?
Right.
It just I had this experience in my younger life when I was in therapy, and I was crying about my unavailable, emotionally absent father, and
Mhm.
like, why couldn't I just have had a dad who was like, he had four daughters and I was the youngest, and I was like, I just wanted the dad who was like daddy's little girl dad. Like, is that so much to ask for? I don't know why he can't just be warm and fuzzy, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And my therapist was like, Terri, here's the thing: if you keep wishing your father was a different person, you're never going to get your needs met. Like, you're just going to keep bashing your head against a brick wall.
Mhm.
She's like, let me ask you something. Do you think it's possible for you to feel loved the ways that your father was capable of loving you?
Ooh, that's nice.
And I was like, like what? She's like, well, what ways do you think he loved you? I said, well, he was dutiful. He paid for college. He bought me a used car. He fixed my teeth.
Yeah,
I didn't have to work in my undergraduate because he supported me so that I could focus on my studies.
not trivial. Yeah,
Right? He
yeah.
says, strap in when I pulled out of his house, right? And I said all of those things. And she said, okay, so now your assignment is to, can you feel loved by them? And you know what? It really made a difference.
Wow, I love your therapist. I wish more therapists were like that. I rarely hear therapists taking that position. I think that's lovely. I think it's really it's such a poignant way to reframe it rather than, because I feel like today that if that were a younger person being in therapy, they would assign some label to the parent, but it should actually dehumanize that parent and would not
Right.
invite compassion or gratitude. And I think what I like about your therapist's approach was that it was better for you too. It allowed you to access loving feelings for him and to allow feeling loved by him in ways that you couldn't before. So no, I think that's brilliant. I love that.
Yes, it's so true, though. That last thing you said was so true. She basically was like, he loves you. It's just not coming in the package, the warm and fuzzy package, the pink package that you would like it to be in.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it's not there.
Right.
And I think that is a shift too. And again, bringing it back to what we were talking about is
Yeah.
being in acceptance that there are limitations.
Mm-hmm.
And exactly as you said, can you get something good out of this relationship and not expect them to be this evolved,
Right.
like, high emotional intelligence human that they may not be,
They may
and they may not have the capacity to be, and they might not want to be.
Exactly. They may not have the capacity. They may not want to be, right? And like saying earlier, somebody adult told them, they're saying, well, you need to go to therapy to work on your traumas. And a lot of these parents are going, what traumas? A, B, I have been in therapy, so I don't really need to work more on my traumas. So I think that's really, really true.
Yeah, like let's stick to our relationship,
Right.
right? Let's stick to the boundaries, the rules of engagement
Mm-hmm.
for us.
Right.
Can I respect what it is that you want? Can you know what I mean? Can you respect what it is that I want? While people are looking for you and looking for your help and looking for all your big brains, I know they can find you because you do something for Maria Shriver, right? For her Sunday newsletter,
Yeah.
the Sunday paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fancy, Josh. I'm just saying. That's pretty fancy.
Yeah. I owe her a column. I haven't done it for a few months, but yeah, I do write for her. Yeah.
That's exciting. So where can people find you? Where's the easiest place? And what other book? Let's talk about your books briefly. So you have 2 books now, and you're
I,
writing your third?
I have 4 books.
Look at you.
I have 2 on estrangement. My first book was called The Marriage Makeover: Finding Happiness in Imperfect Harmony. It was written for parents who would probably divorce if they didn't have kids, but didn't want to put their kids through a divorce. My
Yeah.
second book was called The Lazy Husband: How to Get Men to Do More Parenting and Housework. Then the third, parents are, and the fourth is this most recent one. So yeah, people can find me my website www.drjoshuacoleman.com, and I've got,
Okay.
if you're an estranged parent, I've got a free every other Monday Q&A. I've got webinars that I do every Tuesday, and so there's and I do trainings for therapists as well on my website where you can get CEs. So there's a lot going on.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, this was a pleasure. I have no doubt I'll have you on again. Thank you so much for spending time here. You guys go find Dr. Joshua Coleman. He will change your life, especially if you have problematic family relationships.
Thank you, Terri.